going to call this latest project?
You know, I have no idea.
Project 900 horsepower rotary.
But you know what? I am confident that this is the most advanced two-rotor engine in the world. That, I am sure. These guys from Australia, these engineers from electronic, they're like blown away. They want to give me a computer to use their system and help me map it on the dyno. Basic operation. And suddenly that area of the gigantic manifold has gotten so busy, so cluttered, that we need to make some room. This is in my mind exactly what I wanted, and which is exactly how it came out. But I honestly thought that I had more room to work with. It wasn't until I got in there with the throttle bodies in place, then the linkage, then start to do the plumbing, all with fairly large diameter lines. It just became a nightmare.
You have how many injectors per rotor on this setup?
4, with a total of 8,000 cc's per rotor. That will be good enough to run 40 pounds of boost pressure.
Oh shit.
Which will be enough to make 1,000. Well, the drag racing guys are making 1,080, 1,090 at 60 pounds of boost on methanol. So with this motor here at 40 pounds, which should be in the range of about 7.5. More than adequate for any street engine. This is actually going on a race car, but nonetheless, it's still more power than that car's going to be able to handle.
This is something that nobody else has ever done before?
Never. And believe me, I know what everybody has done. Fairly small world. Anybody who's anybody knows what everybody else has done or is doing.
You said you came up with this idea 7 years ago?
Yeah. I actually came up with this idea for a 4-rotor engine, which we went ahead and built. But since then, I've taken it to higher levels. On the 4-rotor, we ran the primary side of the throttle body, and then the secondary side, peripherals only, for a couple of reasons. Packaging was one, Secondly, four rotor being such a big motor, it was it'll make the power that we're looking for without having the secondary set of injectors that a two-rotor engine has or a three-rotor engine has. The problem in a four-rotor is that only rotor 1 and rotor 4 have large secondary side ports. Rotor 3 and rotor 2 and rotor 3, because of the architecture of the engine and the intermediate side housings, have only, both for primary and secondary, small ports, primary ports, all the way through. So, under hard power, especially under boost, rotor 1 and rotor 4 will make more power than rotor 2 and rotor 3, simply because they have far more port area, more timing, and more volume. So, the downside of that, well, it's all downsides. You have inconsistent distribution. The real downside of it is the fact that you have two rotors at 90 degrees off each other, producing more power than the other two. So that tends to put a lot of harmonic vibrations on the crankshaft, which ends up bending it, and people are plagued with wiping out bearings, when the issue is not the motor or bearing. The fact that you have half the motor making more power than the other half of the motor, and not even at 180 degrees apart, but rather at 90 degrees apart. So it's kind of like a Harley Davidson, pop, 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 instead of pop, 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 pop. You know what I'm saying? So it gets real critical when you start raising power levels up.
Especially under boost, though, right?
Exactly.
Like the four-rotor engine in the 767B race car, for example, is peripheral ported, normally aspirated.
That's the reason why 99% of the people that do four-rotor engines only do peripheral ports, but then you can't run them on the street. You know, they're loud, they're hard to drive, regardless, even if you reduce the peripheral. They have that crazy, exhaust note, inconsistent idle, can't run air conditioning, a million downsides to it. Yeah, it sounds beautiful, but it's not a street car. Race car and street car are two totally different things.
So you've come up with a solution to that problem on the four-rotor?
Absolutely. That's the four-rotor that we have over there. It's already built, and the solution was a very simple one, actually. Instead of having secondary side ports on the side housings,
you just use primaries.
We use only the primaries and run peripherals on the secondary, so that every secondary has its own peripheral port. So mixture distribution is identical on all four rotors, and the peripherals are closed off by the intake manifold with a second set of throttle valves, which close off the peripherals when you're not under hard power, and then by doing that, also clean up the idle. And the engines to idle like.
So then you can run AC and have it streetable.
Exactly.
Makes sense. And these engines, then they're turbocharged, what you're set up in.
Oh yeah. This is big power, big turbo. This engine is actually going into a race car, and throttle response is eminent. That's the most critical thing that we're looking for. So we have a state-of-the-art turbo on the rather large side with a very complex, everything about this motor is complex, but anyway, the header system, exhaust delivery system for the turbocharger is is actually based on a race motor with primaries made to length, coming into a collector with the correct angle, going into a megaphone, which is what makes a rotary engine breathe, because of the nature of the auto cycle, that it reacts like a two-cycle engine. So you run it, rather than having each rotor going into a twin scroll housing, which, you know, works very well. We're actually going into a header, going into a collector, then going into a megaphone, which will expand the gases and cause the pressure within the megaphone to go sky high. And then we have the pipe that actually feeds the turbocharger facing inside the megaphone, facing the flow. So the spool off is just going to be instant. And then whatever the turbo can't handle, it just goes around the pickup and out the tail end of the megaphone to the wastegate. So essentially, the system has two wastegates, one internal for the turbocharger, rather large, because those Borg-Warner EFRs have massive control of wastegate, and that one is controlled by boost, and then the one that's in the megaphone is controlled by back pressure. So there'll be no boost creep, and the throttle response, the boost response will be as quick as the throttle. Full boost by under 2,000 RPM. A lot of work, a lot of thinking, a lot of years of development have gone into bringing this motor together. I've done several of these already, but not to this state of development with individual throttle bodies, closing up the peripherals, plus both side ports, primary and secondary on each rotor. So the engine will actually have 3 volumetric efficiency curves, like 2 VTECs. The rest will finish by hand. That gave me plenty of room for that primary fuel rail return line, which has to go, because the packaging is so tight, has to go between the 2 runners. Made to order. Fantastic. See, this is the return line of the primary fuel rail, and we couldn't use the regular ports because of the interference with the throttle bodies for the third volumetric curve, the peripherals that open and close on demand by
That's these?
Yes, by throttle control. And this could be a boost actuated through a wastegate actuator, or in this particular case we're going to use a electric servo motor so that it's tied directly to the oxygen sensor, the wideband, for targeting and giving lambda values. So as these throttles open up, the computer will be able to compensate the duty cycle of the injectors so that the power delivered is linear and not have a momentary dip in the power curve and then suddenly go up. Like whenever you have you know, like twin turbos and like the Hondas that had the VTEC, you know, when the VTEC kicks in, it's like getting hit with a hammer, you know, it's like ooh, bap, like that, you know, it's not gradual, it's not transition. With the primary ports and then the secondary ports of a third generation block, that sequence is controlled by the throttle body, which allows air to enter the primary side of the engine for torque and then the secondary side for power. In this particular engine, we have a third stage of air induction, which are these throttle bodies that open and close another port here. And these throttle bodies have their own injector. So it's decided that you want an extra couple hundred horsepower and these guys come online, the computer will automatically sense a slight amount higher oxygen as you crack the throttle, oxygen content in the exhaust system, and automatically compensate. Once it's mapped, it'll compensate within 15% of either side of stoichiometric or whatever target lambda value you give it. That's the duty cycles of these injectors. So it'll be very easily mapped. So, like the RX-8 engine, which has the primaries, then the secondaries, and then the 6 ports that open and close, it has 3 stages of volumetric curves. And when the primary side begins to fall off, the secondary comes in. And when the secondary begins to get saturated, then the 6 ports come in. So it's kind of like this, and then like this, and then like this. There's slight dips in the power curve, which are noticeable on a street car. If you put it on a dyno, you can't notice it while driving around. If with a standalone ECU, that could be mapped straight through. Same thing's going to happen here. The problem here is that when these guys open up, they're quite large, and they're going to be under a very high boost. The power is going to come in so sudden that you better know how to drive.
Well, you said before you're limiting this to above second gear, right? You're not putting...
Yes, absolutely. First, second, and third gear will have a switch that will deactivate. Actually, I said it wrong. First, second, and third gear, the third stage is never going to open. Reason being is that there's going to be a micro switch in the 4th, 5th gate. The minute you go into 4th gear or 5th gear, then it will tell the computer that you're in the gears that will allow the throttle bodies to open up. I mean, you could map it any which way you want. You could make it do it earlier, but it's just so much power, it's just unusable.
Especially if you're in turns and things.
Exactly. You're in the middle of a turn, like on a road race car, and all of a sudden those things open up. You know, you have 200 horsepower come in, boom, all at once. You're going to go ass backwards into the wall. So, in this particular case, what we intend to do is put an RPM switch in the car so that the driver can actually pick the RPM that he actually wants them to open them up.
So make it track specific, more or less.
Exactly. Be track specific, and also, you know, when you're executing a turn, you're somewhere at half throttle to 3/4 throttle. You really don't go full throttle until you actually get, see a straight line or very close to a straight line for acceleration. So at that point, the driver will be able to choose the RPM he actually wants it to come in on. Plus, we can choose the gear that we want to come in on. You know, with today's technology with computers, you can do whatever you want.
Whatever you can think of.
Exactly.
And design like this.
Okay, so now we gotta take this fuel rail out and drop a secondary fuel rail in, and all the plumbing is pretty much done. Have to still complete some hoses and trough fit everything, and then we put the injectors and go ahead and assemble the engine. So we're in real good shape.
You said the guy that is getting this engine is giving you more time to go ahead and do the dyno work here and
Yes,
tuning work?
we started talking about doing this project almost a year ago. Actually, in February of this year is when the decision was made to go forward with it. But for whatever reasons, we didn't actually get the go-ahead. We didn't actually receive the funding for the parts till a month ago. So we had already started, already had the house is modified, the rotors made, the rotator assembly done. It was supposed to be an all aluminum engine. The parts never showed up till 2 weeks ago, so there was no way to cut them open. Damaged aluminum parts to see how much port area we actually have for porting. So the choice was made to go ahead and build the engine with standard cast iron side housings, go through with it. But now it's getting close to the deadline. The car had to be redesigned, re-engineered, move a bunch of stuff around. We don't even know if the car's going to have enough cooling for this much power. So at this point, with the obvious choice is to go ahead and build a relatively mild turbo motor, something like a real hot street motor that will make 450, 500 horse. Nothing this crazy, because this will make depending on how much turbo you got, whatever you want. With the turbo we're using, this thing will live at 750 all day long. But there's a lot of factors, a lot of unknowns about the car. The car doesn't have enough tire. We don't know how it's going to handle. So rather than ship the motor and not use it to its full capacity and run into issues, we decided just to build a Clark Kent motor, not a Superman motor, and get the car running, get all the subsystems and support systems worked out, and then instead of tuning the engine on the dyno on the car, we're going to go ahead and tune it on the engine dyno, map it. We're going to have the aid of the engineers at the computer house, and we're going to do telemetry, and they'll be able to see halfway across the world what we're actually doing, get some ideas, bounce back and forth, and just basically get this thing maxed out so that when I deliver it to the customer, it's plug and play. All they'll have to do is run power to the ECU, ground to the ECU, and obviously hook the dash that gives the information to the port outlets of the computer.
What are all these lines you got going around here?
These are all fuel lines. This engine's going to run on ethanol, so it's going to demand 40-45% more fuel by volume for the same boost, for the same horsepower. And then on top of that is a turbo engine, which in itself it requires an extra 30-40% more fuel. So this engine is going to consume on E85 twice as much fuel that it would consume for the same power output as gasoline. That's why we need so many injectors and so large injectors and so much fuel delivery. This is a number 10 fuel line. It's 5/8 of an inch inside diameter. But whereas gasoline is very unforgiving when you start exceeding 24-25 pounds of boost, that's basically the threshold of gas, and you better know how to tune the engine to be able to live reliably at that level. Ethanol can go, we've had up to 40 pounds and the engine doesn't even feel it, And the power level is just phenomenal, and the safety margin that you get is it's God's gift to rotary engines. And it's clean burning, it's has absolutely no emissions. The only problem is that, in a street application, you reduce your driving range by half. But it's dirt cheap. No kidding. Over by my house, Eddie pointed it out yesterday, $1.58 E85.
Well,
We're going to break these fuel lines loose and put in the secondary fuel rail. in the butt. It's really, really busy in here. One of the things that became very difficult was being able to package everything in there.
Is this the... Yeah.
Okay, here's the other one.
Sorry. Well, there's a will, there's a way, right?
Yeah. Everything is still a little bit loose. You know, this is a one of a kind. So I didn't want to tighten anything or completely weld anything in place until I had it all figured out. Once all the plumbing is done, all the lines are ran, everything is in place, everything fits, then we'll go ahead and finish welding all the bushings, all the bongs, fuel bongs, fuel lines. But this is the basic setup. It's just very, very, very tight. Very tight. There's not much room for anything. I have packed two rather large 45mm throttle bodies in there, along with all the plumbing, 2 extra fuel rails, return lines, feed lines. With feed lines is number 10, 5/8 line. Returns is a -6. Had to relocate the feed line to the primary fuel rail and the return line. Each peripheral throttle body has its own dedicated injector, which goes right here. So yeah, there is a lot crammed into a very, very, very small space. And then we ran into another headache, which was once I had everything in place, and the throttle linkage was hitting the fuel lines. So I had to put on my thinking hat and make some new throttle arms to move the rod that actuates and synchronizes both throttle bodies so they wouldn't hit the bottom of the fuel lines. It's been a lot to overcome.
What a work of art, man.
At this point, I'm going to pull off the elbows that are going to join the upper manifold to the throttle bodies, so I can set the upper manifold on and take a look at it, because I still have to weld them. The runners are made, but they still need to be welded in place. And then these elbows need to be trimmed fit. Those are the throttle bodies, which will be synchronized, and that's when they're open, and that's when they're closed. Open, close. And then the intake manifold has two additional runners that have been grafted onto the secondary throttle valves. So the actual the area of both the original runners plus the two additional runners combined equals exactly the area of each one of these 52mm valves. So now there's absolutely no throttle restriction whatsoever. Basically have increased the breathing capacity of the engine by more than 100%. Oops, nope, I got it. There's a spacer. There's so much stuff in there that couldn't package it. I had to build a spacer in order to be able to put the elbows. Could have done it as one piece, but then it would have been very difficult to do any service on the engine. So these have to be cut, and then the silicone 90 degrees placed in there. That's what remains to be done. And then the system is done completely. Actually, around the back, it's easier to see. We'll cut them, the runners around here, once they're welded in place, and put these guys here. Cut X amount off the bottom, X amount off the top, and then join those two. So like I said, there's going to be 3 volumetric curves. Your primary runners, then your secondary runners, controlled by the throttle body, and then when the throttle body is wide open, then the additional peripheral ports will open on demand for maximum power.
So it seems like you never run out of power with a setup like this.
No.
You run out of car
You run
to
out
handle
of,
it.
You run out of balls is what you run out of. Pretty early. Pretty early.
Once you get this...
And totally reliable. That's the beauty about it. To give you an idea how much fuel this thing is going to take. I still have to put the fitting on it, but that's your fuel line. 5/8 in diameter. For comparison basis, an OEM line is 8mm, which is 5/16 of an inch. So area-wise, this has about 5 times more area. So that is your secondary fuel rail. There'll be a fitting here, and this will be your fuel line coming in. The fuel will split into here and into here, go through both major fuel rails. Each fuel rail will feed its sub-fuel rail for each set of injectors, and then they'll all come together once again to the return line, and then the return line will come out the front here to a regulator, and we're going to mount it right here, just like how all the guys do it, and that way nobody will see what's actually underneath the intake. It's you know, it's so beautifully made, and no one's going to know it's there.
Unless you look from the back of the engine or watch this video.
Well, they'll know something's up when they're left 10 blocks behind by the second lap.
Well, my engine doesn't make as much power. What's up?
Well, didn't Andrew have a problem keeping up with all those guys that had the turbo motors before when he had that aluminum engine?
Well,
Wasn't that
we were the class of the field of the naturally aspirated cars, but you know, we had nothing for the turbo guys. I mean, those Mitsubishi cars, those Evos, those guys were making They were saying 7.5. You know, I've heard those engines can make reliably more power, and all-wheel drive cars. Downside of that is that with all that power and such tight turns, you run out of tires and run out of brakes pretty quick. So we were actually able to be on the bumper of the slowest turbo car with an aspirated peripheral 13B motor making about 340 horse. So now we're going to double that. We're shooting for 700. The car is just not going to handle it. You got to get tires in it. You got to get the driver up to speed. You got to map it so that the power doesn't come in too violently. But he'll have plenty of power to just drive by them down the straight. In the corners, you can't beat an all-wheel drive car. You can't. But you know, one thing is catching somebody and one thing is passing somebody. So if you can pass somebody cleanly down the straight, they'll never catch you again. They won't. Very difficult to pass somebody through the corner.
Beautiful. Put a lot of 3 a.m. shifts in on this one, huh?
3 solid weeks fabricating, sleepless nights, going home at 3:30 in the morning, weekends also, but well worth it. Well worth it. Light is shining through is where the new ports are, and then on top are the original OEM runners.
So you're, like you said, I mean, you are basically doubling the
airflow. Doubling the airflow, but not only that, by having the peripheral port in its place, you totally do away with frictional losses and thermal inefficiencies of the air rubbing through the intake manifold. All that picks up, as you pressurize it, you pick up heat. So even though the side port part of the engine will work as stock, when these guys open up, whenever you have a peripheral port, the volumetric efficiency of a peripheral port done correctly is about 130%, whereas the volumetric efficiency of a side port is between 85 to 90%. You can never get 100% because there's frictional losses. There'll be absolutely no frictional losses through the third stage of the engine.
that just converts to what? More power?
More power. More power. For the same amount of boost, you double the air, so you're going to double your power. For the same amount of boost. And the idea here, everybody thinks that more boost makes more power. True, given a fixed amount of frictional losses and restrictions. So if you reduce the restriction for the same amount of boost, you're getting more air in. So you can make more power with less boost. What you end up doing is making free power, because you're reducing the thermal stresses on the engine, and since you're making more power to a point where you may not even need it, you can back the boost down. That's the whole idea.
Does the boost drop at all when these open?
No, because boost is basically, the reason why there's boost is because you have pressure buildup. The turbocharger puts out X amount of air, rated in pounds per hour, or pounds per minute, or cubic feet per minute, whatever. There's a zillion different ways of measuring it. But if the turbo is pumping, let's say, for round numbers, 100 units of air, 100 CFM. And by the way, as a rule of thumb, it makes no difference if it's rotary or piston. Every 1.1 pound of air per minute equals 1 horsepower. That's very general and it's totally accepted in the industry. So let's say that the turbocharger is pumping out 100 CFM. For round numbers, we don't care what horsepower that is, okay? And it's got no restriction. It's got nothing to back up against. There's no boost. Now, if you've got 100 CFM coming here and the throttle valves are closed, you've got vacuum here, you've got boost here. So the reason why there is boost, the definition of boost is pressure, pounds per square inch, PSI. Okay, so for a given amount of boost, when you have restriction, whatever the restriction happens to be, the boost goes up. More power out of the, more spool on the turbo, more boost. So you're cramming because you have more air, more pressure on the intercooler side of the throttle body. Then that air, that pressure pushes the air into the engine. But if that throttle body gets done away with, or the engine, as in this case, has more capacity to breathe, more doors open, then for the same amount of boost, you're getting a lot more air in, because the fact that you've reduced the restriction, the turbo can pump more CFM to get to the same boost level. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's why I asked you if when that opened, if it somehow dropped the boost, but no, the turbo
No, the
actually
turbo will make up for
keeps
it.
up because it was restricted
Exactly.
by the.
Exactly.
Interesting.
It's a beautiful thing. Old school V8s. You know, when I was growing up, you know, V8s were the thing. Small block Chevy, big block Chevy, Chrysler, Ford, whatever, overhead valves V8. So I remember, you know, going out and putting bigger valves on the heads, supporting the heads, doing all this stuff. Bigger valves is more area, less restriction. Okay, that's why the engine can breathe more, because you're doing away with the restrictions. Okay, but bigger valves are heavier, so you get to the point that there's so much mass, reciprocating mass going up and down, that the valves begin to float against the seat. You get valve seat, valve float, start pumping compression back out of the combustion chamber. That's why overhead valves engines don't spin as high as 4-valve engines, or overhead cam engines pushing on the valves. If you have one big valve, let's say, again, for round numbers, 1 pound. It have to be a really big valve to weigh 1 pound, but for round numbers. And then you get 2 valves that give you the same or more area, but weigh 1/3 the same amount. So you have far less reciprocating mass. Therefore, automatically the RPM is going to go up, because there's less effort on the engine, and because the valves weigh less, automatically you've raised the limit of where they're going to start to bounce. That's why all the little Japanese engines and little European engines could rev a lot more than American engines. Now, you know, and 2000 plus, you know, all your American muscle is you know, not all of it, but a great deal of it. You know, your better engines, your Corvettes, your LSs, Chrysler Hemis, they're all overhead valve, overhead cam engines, not overhead valve. Overhead valve, you have a cam pushing on a rod, pushing on a rocker arm, pushing on the valve. Overhead cam, you get rid of all that crap, and the cam actually pushes on the valve. So you get rid of a bunch of crap that's going like this, which reduces the RPM of the engine.